Hi, I'm JJ. Welcome back. Now, today I'm going to do a monthly kind of check in, update, see where I am. I already did a weekly update because I had listened to a lot of audiobooks at the beginning of the month. So this is basically a 2 week thing, and I'll do the wrap up at next weekend or shortly after that for just the ones that I still have to finish yet. I'll start with my first um, favorite book of the month. It was it was a surprise. Buffalo Hunter Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. I had heard a lot about this, but nobody actually talks about what it's about. So I knew enough to assume that it was some kind of monster story, a horror story that I could read this month. And I figured out early on, so it is a vampire story. I don't feel like I'm spoiling anything because I assumed that going in, and it is revealed fairly quickly enough. I loved this book. It was a near perfect book for me, and my cats are crazy again today, so I apologize for that. But this dealt with the vampire genre in the most unique way possible. And I am going to give a few spoilers in here. I feel like it doesn't take away from the story because the story is just so immersive and so unique, but that a lot of people who don't like horror may not read it because they don't like that kind of thing. So I feel like the more that you know going into this book, perhaps you'll give it a chance. And the ones who are already going to read it, I don't feel like it's really ruining the aspect. But so the way that they deal with vampires here is essentially you are what you eat. So if they consume humans, they stay human. If they consume more animals, they start to get those characteristics. So like if someone consumes deer or antler, primarily, they'll start to grow horns and stuff, which I think is a really fascinating, unique study on identity, which is what I think the story is talking about. So it is discussing the white men coming in and killing all the buffalo. Essentially, it discusses the extinction or genocide of the indigenous people, and then the ones who are moving to the relocated by force to their reservations, and the starvation and stuff that occurs. So it kind of deals with all these really dark times in history by using this monster form of identity. So to survive, if there's not that many people, many of your people left, you would consume to stay human other humans, so therefore white humans, and then you sort to become more white than indigenous. And is that something that, do you want to become the monster, or who you view as the monster, or do you want to try to maintain your sense of culture? And in doing so, that means killing your own people. So this isn't even a huge part of the book, but it is a theme of the book as the story unfolds. It is just this representation of who you are and how you perceive yourself within the world around you, and how the world perceives you. So who's the villain here? Who's the monsters? Who are the monsters here? And I just believe that it was done so wonderfully and uniquely that I was not expecting to be so touched by the story. And it is a dual. It's actually three points of view, but you get the third point of view. Basically, it starts the story and ends the story, but overall, it goes into the 1800s, and tells the story via journals of a priest who was hearing the confession of indigenous vampire. And you get to see their connection. You get to see why he trusted him with his story, why how the priest views his views on good and evil, the idea of good versus evil, and just so much depth in a story that is also eerie and can be terrifying, not in the sense of it being a horror story about vampires terrifying, but in the events, or in the sense of that cultural shift during that time period and how fragile and terrifying it was on each side, as they saw each other as other, as they saw each other as the monsters under the bed and the people who they were terrified of. So I absolutely love that story. Highly recommend it. If you're not fully into horror, just know that, like I said, it has so much depth and so much just unique perspective of just cultural destruction and identity and understanding who you are as a person, that it carries the more fantastical parts of the story. I also read The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis, and I actually read this by the suggestion of Doug, because for my book club we were reading Piranesi, that's what it is, by Susanna Clarke. And he told me that I would get more out of it if I read The Magician's Nephew first. So I've only, as a kid, I read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but I have not read any of the other stories from that world. And so The Magician's Nephew was written later, but was published, so it was published later, but it's the prequel to the rest of Narnia. So it's basically the creation story. And the religious allegories in this are basically, hitting you over the head. Like maybe they were referenced and stuff and you understood them in the other ones, especially with Aslan being Christ-like and sacrificing himself and dying and resurrection, all that stuff. But this one, it literally is the creation. So like the creation story. So like Eden, they reference the son of Adam. They have magical fruit, an apple, and the witch even uses the idea of they don't want you to consume this because it will give you knowledge that they don't want you to know. So it's the whole idea of the first sin and the knowledge of good and evil. So it's really hard not to recognize those religious allegories in this, and then putting them throughout the rest of the series. What I did like about this was also understanding, I said in a previous video that I love the Magicians TV show. I couldn't get past the first book because they changed all the characters that I loved. So the TV show came after and they separated characters and made some different. So I loved the characters that the TV show did. So when I read the book and they were combining characters that I loved separately, I did not like the reduced plot and the reduced characters, which is why I never finished. But in The Magicians, since it is a huge nod to Narnia and the wardrobe and all that in the magical world, they also they have these pools that you delve into, and it takes you to these different worlds. It was interesting to see that on the show because then I understood the connection with Narnia and all that stuff. But I didn't understand it was a reference to the magician's nephew. And that's how they entered through the different worlds. So I really enjoyed that aspect. And I also was intrigued by the fact that you went from world to world, or you could access these worlds by a ring. And it felt like an absolute nod to The Hobbit and to J.R.R. Tolkien, who is a friend of C.S. Lewis. And I felt like he put that in there since Tolkien put him in his book. So just the idea of these magical, very important rings was a fun little nod that I liked. So then I had high hopes then going into Piranesi, and I was actually let down. I wanted it to be better than it was. I was quite disappointed with it. I felt like nothing actually happened. And yes, I understood the references. I know, especially with the names, the magician's uncle, the actual uncle, shared surname and characteristic of one of the characters in this story. And then you also have the understanding of magician's nephew knowing that there's these different pools to other worlds. So I just assumed it was just one of these other worlds. So I didn't necessarily feel all that inclined to being interested in the mystery of why he was there, what it was, as I should have been. So it just felt like it was dragging for me. If I didn't care about that aspect and I just wanted to know more about the place he was in, I wasn't overly invested in how the story turned out. That being said, I did like the nods here and there to different, to Narnia, to The Magician's Nephew, to all that stuff. The whole concept of Piranesi being, the prison, the labyrinth that you can't escape, was important to the story. And knowing that going in, I guess I didn't feel so the twist or the reveal at the end, I guess, just didn't matter too much to me, because I kind of had the idea of what the place was to begin with. What I will say, though, is that the concept of being trapped here by yourself and not realizing that there were other worlds out there, and him essentially just being okay with, keeping himself busy, not trying to escape, not really trying to ask questions. It kind of feels like that's how we live our lives these days. Just, every day is always the same. Nothing really changes, especially if you don't interact with the outer world and you're just, going to work and back and not really living. You're just kind of there surviving. Like, I feel like that was a good metaphor to understand. And also you can see that she wrote it during, or it was published during the height of COVID. So it would have, I feel like if I would have read it then, it might have been more profound to me, because you're living in this isolation. You do want to find a way out. You don't want to be stuck in here. You do crave that human interaction that was missing for me now, reading the book at this time in the world and in my life, especially with the world going on the way that it is. I almost would prefer to be able to kind of hide and not deal with the outside world and not feel trapped by being away from humans and stuff. So maybe just the time period in which I read it versus when she wrote it slightly skew that experience. Anyway, for me, I just didn't overly enjoy it. One that I did recently finish also was Queen Bee, Juno Dawson. So this is the prequel to her Royal Majesty's Coven trilogy. That for some reason was a mouthful. And I picked this one up specifically because it takes place in the time period with Anne Boleyn. It's Anne Boleyn's coven. And she is prevalent in the story. At first I was worried that because it starts out with her death. So I was worried that it was just using that as a gimmick and that she wasn't actually going to be in the story at all. But that they do show flashbacks leading up to why she was executed and her coven, and will lead into the series, which is her Royal Majesty that they're talking about in the actual series is Elizabeth I, so Anne Boleyn's daughter. So I feel like this was relevant, and it was actually quite fun and entertaining. Just a quick read. It was, since you know this is a prequel and you know that, more is going to happen, it didn't feel overly high stakes, even though there were high stakes in it. It just felt like almost like a feel-good story for me. Just immersing in the world, kind of getting to know this author's version of Anne Boleyn, getting to kind of delve into some of the rumors and secrets and stuff that were swirling around Anne Boleyn. She was always accused of witchcraft, bewitching the king. And so this kind of leaned into that more and made a huge story about it that I found entertaining, and I will be reading more of this series. I just, I love this time period. I also did a bunch of nonfiction, but the last fiction book that I read was, or listened to, was The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. So I had actually already read Midnight's Children by him, which is essentially the birth of the nation of India when it has its independence and everything. And it follows the storyline of the people who were born on midnight on their nation, shared the birth of their nation with their birthday. And as you follow that story, it has magical realism elements because they all have like these superpowers. And then you get that aspect, as well as a history lesson, geopolitical, political, like all this stuff going on within the development and birth of that nation. I found it entertaining for the most part. It kind of was a bit longer than I expected, but I did like it enough that I wanted to read his other works. And Satanic Verses is one of the #1 banned books. He keeps getting it keeps getting banned, and he actually had death threats and people trying to kill him for his telling of this. So I really wanted to read it and just see what all the fuss is about. And I did find it very, very confusing. For the most part, it reminded me so much of how lost I was in 100 Years of Solitude. Yet being entertained and understanding the cultural significance of this story, because you were getting a lot of political and religious references and aspects within this story, kind of a retelling or reinterpretation of different stories within the Quran. And so I found his, I can understand how they would want to ban it, because it seems like blasphemy. But it's art. It's taking what you know and changing it around and giving it to you in an unexpected way. So I did find that interesting. I think I enjoyed it more than a lot of people might, just because I have read the Quran. And so I actually understood the references that he was making. I understood the characters he was uh, talking about, and the ways in which he brought them to life or kind of warped their original intention and all that stuff. So I found the parts about that fascinating. He also talked slightly about the Hindu religion, which would have made sense because there was it's always hugely controversial that time in that area with um, the distinction between the two religious groups and their constant conflict and stuff. So I can see why that might have been considered controversial. I always find talking about any kind of religion and learning more about the religion, learning the different ways it can be interpreted. I find that all interesting. So for me, it might be more interesting than others. But that being said, it did confuse me for a large majority of it, especially when the summary says it's about two people who survive a plane crash. And then all of a sudden you get all this magical realism, and you get, this political conflict and these Quranic verses and people coming to life and being reinterpreted and all this stuff. Was not what I was expecting going into it, but it was interesting enough. I stuck with it. I enjoyed it. I did feel like it ran long at some time, at times longer than it needed to be. But overall, I was glad that I read it. So then the nonfiction are They Were Her Property by Stephanie E. Jones Rogers. And so that is about women who owned enslaved people. And a lot of times, they get swept under the rug because we assume that they weren't part of the day to day. We assume that they were all part of their husband's, property, and it's not like they had their own. But there was actually so much autonomy for women, white women in the South at that time, because they were written into contracts and there was law protecting their property of enslaved people. Not any other property, not any other money. All that could be controlled or lost by the husband if he fell into hard times and was losing the house or the land or whatever. And there were protections written that that would not include the woman's property of enslaved people. So I find that really telling as a nation that we actually had specific laws protecting that. So they could, if they had there was runaway slaves or escaped, they could then claim them. Many of them went to the markets and bought more. Some of the more horrific stuff that they were talking about was not only their treatment of their enslaved people, but how some of them ran brothels, knowing that they could make more money off of the enslaved women, whether through the brothels, that then they could not get in trouble for, because they forced their enslaved people to run the brothels. So then if they got shut down or got in trouble, it was the enslaved people who would be getting in trouble, and not the mistress who owned them. They also used their women enslaved property as breeders, so that they saw it more financially beneficial than the men did, because a lot of people did not want the extra mouth to feed. They saw it as, it's a small investment now. It's giving us essentially a free enslaved property later. They would go and rescue children and bring them home if they were separated from their parents because of, you know, all the slave trading and stuff. And once again, a very cheap or a free investment that would later be a full grown part of their property later, that they could then use and sell or use in whatever way they imagined. After the Emancipation Proclamation, women, just like a lot of men in the South, never told their enslaved, the people that were enslaved under them, that they were free. So they kept them for much longer than necessary. They also would let the adults go but keep the children, and then claim that they were orphaned and that they were doing a service by keeping them and taking care of them, when they then got to go essentially around the law and still maintain the ownership of different people. So it was a really highlighting a lot of things that I didn't necessarily realize, and sad to say I didn't overly think about a lot. One thing that I feel at a disservice for not thinking about sooner was the fact that, you know, when you think of the North and South, and the North was trying to abolish slavery, there was a lot of people who lived in the North but owned property in the South, and so they still owned enslaved people. They still, you know, ran plantations by having enslaved people work for them, and benefited from being seen as the good side because they were living in the North, although they were operating in the South, and still widely wanted to protect that property, that land, that plantation, despite the fact that they had overseers working it for them. They were still highly invested, and it kind of compromised and confused things during wartime, because they fully supported wanting to keep being able to do that, but they were, you know, living in the North, who was trying to, in their mind, take that away from them. So that's just one aspect of it that I never actually thought about before. And then I also listened to The Black Jacobins. This one was by C.L.R. James. I have a few other of his books on my TBR, but this one is essentially a Toussaint biography during the Haitian Revolution and stuff. So I had already read the Avengers of the New World, which gives a more overall arc of the world at that time. This one is more contained to the Caribbean, life in Haiti, and specifically Toussaint, and how why they followed him, what you know, how they succeeded in the revolution when so many other slave rebellions, especially, you know, one that's popular in the United States was the Nat Turner Rebellion. All those failed. His was the only successful one, and so you get to understand the importance of him as a person, the cultural relevance of this revolution to begin with. And one thing that I hadn't also realized was the huge, I guess, prejudice between, so you had the French, the white people in Haiti at the time. You had the enslaved Black people at the time, but then you also had the mixed race people. Also, mostly, most of them were enslaved as well, but there was this hierarchy where they were still considered better than the darker skinned enslaved people. And it created this animosity within the two groups who should have been working together because they were all enslaved and they all had their agendas. There was this animosity because the ones at least had some status and didn't want to lose it. And it was just this unique perspective that I had never thought about, never heard about, and it was fascinating to read about. Another one along the lines of my continued exploration of kind of current events was The Biggest Prison on Earth by Ilan Pappé. And that is about Israel and the apartheid and the rising of the state of Israel, the continued genocide of the Palestinians. And we get to see how it had started from the beginning because, you know, we know that this is not a new thing, that it has continuously been happening. And you get to see the depth and the depravity of them working towards this goal that they're now near completion in, that the world just keeps watching and standing by and letting happen. But it's not a we have the right to protect ourselves things. It's this systematic plan that they started decades ago and have continuously worked for, and the horrors that they have done to the area, to the Palestinian people, to anyone who stands against them. That's all, you know, you can see as it progresses, as it gets worse, as their the ideas that they want to implement get worse. It was a brutal read. It's a very necessary read. There's a lot of it's dense, so it does take time. I did not rush through it. I started it ages ago and kind of stopped and started and finally was able to finish it this month. A quick read was the end of Empire. It's about Attila the Hun and the fall of Rome. I only knew, you know, small things about Attila the Hun way back in history class. So this was a good, more in-depth recap about who the Huns were. Very similar. It was fun because there was actually a lot of references to a book that I had read before, Alaric the Goth. He makes an appearance here, as do the Goths, because the Huns and the Goths operated at the same time. They kept coming in contact with each other, and they had very similar remains behind, so like how they lived. So a lot of archaeologists and stuff didn't always attribute things to the right peoples because, you know, the way that they buried their dead was the same, and different stuff like that. So that was an interesting take that I hadn't thought about. Another interesting, I did not realize how Attila the Hun died. How after this huge larger than life that he had, that it would be such a quiet random death, and then how without having any successors, how the nation that he amassed quickly fell apart without any successors to take his place. Very much like, you know, with Alexander the Great, or anyone who doesn't trust even their own children to take up the throne after them, and the way that it causes a downfall, very much similar to Herod. I always find that interesting. You have so many Herods when you read the Bible. As Herod the Great had a bunch of kids that he all named Herod. So in the Bible, it's talking about like 3 separate Herods in addition to Herod the Great, and you kind of conflate them all to be in like one person, but it wasn't. And so he essentially killed all of his children that he felt were going to be good successors, because he felt that they could be a threat to him, and he didn't want anyone to take his throne away. So he killed the ones that could have ruled well, and left behind the 3 who essentially lost his kingdom for him and had it go back into the hands of the Romans. Not to get completely off topic of everything, but I just always find that fascinating because of him in particular, who was the product of his own downfall. Then you had each one continuously either being exiled or killed, and then losing their part of his empire. And Roman would, instead of putting another puppet king on the throne to appease the Jewish people, they brought in their different overseers from Rome, and that's how Pontius Pilate landed in the story. And then eventually, eventually, you know what happens with Jesus and all that stuff, that all takes place because Herod didn't trust his own children. Alexander the Great divided his up amongst his soldiers, or his leadership and soldiers. The same thing with Julius Caesar. He left it to multiple people, not just one. So then that caused civil war and stuff. And it was very similar to then what Attila the Hun's empire became, because there was no clear succession after him. So long story short, that was just a good kind of refresher of the life of Attila the Hun and the empire of the Huns at that time. And their rather than how we learned it in history, where you literally just learn about them and not them connected to the outside world. So I like to see their interactions and how it influenced Rome and how it became the fall of Rome and all that stuff that I didn't fully comprehend or learn about when I was in school. So that was the end of Empire by Attila the Hun, and Attila the Hun, and the fall of the Roman Empire. That's like the subtitle, and it's by Christopher Kelly. The last book that I read or finished so far this year or this month, I've been talking too much, I'm not thinking properly now, was The Lavender Scare by David Cay Johnston. So this always fascinated me in history. In the United States, we always talk about the Red Scare, which is McCarthyism and trying to weed out any, they were terrified of communists, basically blackballing a whole bunch of people, calling them communists. It became like a literal witch hunt. So if you've read the play The Crucible, which is about the Salem witch trials, Arthur Miller actually wrote it in response to McCarthyism, and how there was never any proof. It was just word of mouth and accusation, and how that spread this terror and untrust amongst the people in society. It was his commentary on this kind of thing, how you just point fingers and That's how you get rid of your enemy. That's how you get rid of the neighbor when you wanted his land and he wouldn't sell it to you. That's how you get rid of your romantic rival. Like whatever, you just, you point the finger. Back then you called them witch. Now you call them communist. Now it's, ICE and immigrants, whether they are or not, whether they're legal or not. You just point the finger and then, mass hysteria happens. What little people talk about, or at least I don't hear anyone talking about, is the lavender scare, which actually happened a lot longer than the Red Scare. So this happened in like around 1947 and lasted through 1975. And they rounded up a bunch of LGBTQ people and just essentially no proof. You were guilty by association. You were guilty by somebody pointing the finger at you. People were too horrified to stand up for themselves to argue, so they just left their job. And what they were doing is they were trying to get rid of them in government positions because they believed, or they said, that they were a security risk because they could be blackmailed, when they were the ones who were essentially doing the blackmail and causing this mass hysteria. And the other weird thing about this is it happened right after the Alfred Kinsey. He's a biologist who had the Kinsey scale, talking about same-sex attraction and how there is a scale and how there's probably more than we realized. And it caused this like moral panic within the United States. During World War II, a bunch of women went into the workforce and men went to war, came back, and now women could do the work of men. And it kind of upset what they thought their, the morality of the United States should have been. And so they started blaming it on queer people and saying that, once again, double think, overbearing mothers cause gay sons, but mothers not loving their children enough and not showing them enough attention also caused gay sons. So like it was somehow the mother's fault both ways. And they didn't even talk about like what real queerness was. It was just this thing that they needed to be scared of. And so they, thousands, estimates are at least 5,000 to possibly tens of thousands of people lost their jobs, their livelihoods during this time period, because they were either forced out, they were terrified of being exposed, so they quit. There was no fight because it was so badly seen by society that they just wanted to slowly fade away rather than having a drawn out court case and trying to prove themselves innocent. What is interesting is the way that it happened, that nobody talks about, is they were destroying the lives of so many people, and it led to a lot of people dying by suicide because of losing everything. And then the government had to find a way to not be, attached to all these suicides that they then forced. So then they were, changing evidence, lying about things, and it just created this really horrible situation all around. And then as you see it progress, you go through the civil rights movement, which then leads to the gay and lesbian rights movements, the LGBT movement, especially with the riots and stuff. So Stonewall, they used to go in and just attack a whole bunch of establishments with known gay activity, and basically harass them, arrest them, beat them up, burn the places down. And so Stonewall is the place where a bunch of people took a stand and stood up against the police, which we then acknowledge as like the front runner for that movement, for the Pride movement. And so all this starts with the Lavender Scare, starting back in 1947. And then when Eisenhower went in, another reason why I'm disliking him the more and more I hear about him, and how he basically was completely on board with, and you'll probably recognize this rhetoric, but cleaning the house, and they wanted to get rid of any types of amoral people that they could get rid of, and that's kind of continued on for years and years. It's also, so not only do you have a response to the rising of women's rights and civil rights and all that stuff, it's also a specific response to the New Deal that FDR created, that gave working class individuals, mostly white, a bunch of, I guess, options, a bunch of power, creating the middle class. And so a lot of politicians took that as a threat to their own power. And this was their backlash and attack, response to that, is pushing for their, what they considered a moral agenda. And then you kind of see the idea of the Red Scare. You see the reference to the Crucible. You see the references to 1984. You see, and I had talked about it earlier, with the Stasi in Berlin, East Berlin, turning on their neighbors, paying people to turn in people who they thought were sympathizing with the West. You had the same thing in North Korea, with people turning on their neighbors, especially if they were not just sympathizing with the West, but also with the South Korea, or those who tried to leave, and they would be, told on and all that stuff. So we had this whole time where it was, essentially the witch hunts, the fear mongering, the turning on your neighbor, the division within, whether it's class, whether it's cultural identity, whether it's gender, whether it's sexual orientation. They just always, throughout history, we see how the government uses its own people against each other and builds this distrust, so that we can't band together and fight against them because we're too scared and hiding our own secrets, or too scared of not even doing anything wrong but getting turned in anyway. And that's, once again, very much what's happening in the world, in the United States today, like I said, with ICE. So that part in history always fascinated me. I just feel that it's never talked about. So I already had watched a documentary, and also just the amount of people that they killed or were responsible for dying by suicide, that were war heroes that won the war against Hitler and the axis of evil. So you had Alan Turing, who did the Enigma code. He essentially helped end the war, save a whole bunch of people. Then there were the revelation that he was, not straight. So he had a choice for castration, or a lot of them were put in insane asylums. They had in the 40s had declared it a mental illness to be anything other than straight. And so you had all these great minds of, especially even war heroes that saved us, that were then had this fall from grace, and like he died by suicide, and he was not the only one. We also talk Nash, I forget his first name, but the movie Beautiful Mind was based on the book about him, and he won the Nobel Prize for mathematics. He also was bisexual, or known to not be straight, and he had to hide that, or risk being stripped, of his medal, and just all kinds of stuff where we wrongly accused people, and we very wrongly prosecuted people just for being who they are, in a society that made you fear them as other, made you fear them as not being trustworthy, because they had the secret or were living in the closet. And I watched a documentary. It was The Lavender Scare. I don't remember how long ago the documentary was, but I had finally got to read that book, and it is just I feel of under appreciated time in American history that just needs more discussion. Anyway, those are the books that I read so far, and then I have to I got just under 200 pages left of Plain Bad Heroines that I plan to read this month, as well as since this is really short, Fate's Bane. It's a queer fantasy novella by the same author who just wrote The Lost, or The Magic of the Lost, which is the book I just finished at the beginning of this month. The last of the trilogy was The Sovereign, and I finished that at the beginning of the month, and I bought this one that I want to finish too. I really like their writing. And then, because I really loved Buffalo Hunter, Stephen Graham Jones has another book that I am reading, or listening to rather, Only Good Indians. It's another labeled as horror, but it's very culturally thematic, trying to understand, once again, identity, and basically just understanding and sharing the story of a different indigenous people who are basically dealing with a monster, and I haven't figured out if they're the monster, or if the monster is after them. It kind of is leaving me wondering. So I enjoy it so far, and so I'll have finished that in time to do my final monthly wrap up on next week. So I read a lot, I talked a lot, I went off on a few tangents, so if you are still listening, thank you for that, and happy reading, have a great day, and I'll see you soon. Thank you.